The Mo Ibrahim Foundation and Africa Non-Ground Foundation says that Nigeria received most of the official development assistance or concessional funds from multilaterals in 2022. The foundation disclosed this in its 2024 forum report published on June 18th titled Financing Africa, Where is the Money? According to the report, Nigeria received the most official development assistance from multilaterals out of any country in Africa within the period under review. Multilaterals are international financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the European Union. With proper planning, observance due to due process, how can this window of opportunity have helped Nigeria to deal with the factors at the root of her current economic circumstances? Joining us now to have a conversation is Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, and a former director of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Many thanks for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much, and good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, Nigeria has been purported to receive $3.5 billion in 2022 in these funds. However, we know that quite a few times that Nigeria has applied to international organizations for funds. It is to stabilize the naira, to use it to help our currency. However, do you think that there are better uses of this money coming into the country?
Well, the Official Development Assistance Fund is meant to support developing economies, to strengthen their economies. Not necessarily even about shoring up the naira. It's about building the capacity of the economy, either in terms of infrastructure, social development, poverty reduction, and so on. And in evaluating the value of a development assistance or a foreign debt or foreign borrowing, we need to look at a number of factors. First, we need to look at the cost of the fund. How much is it costing us in terms of the interest rate? If you look at this particular facility, the cost is just about 1%, which of course is reasonable if it is applied properly. The second point you look at is the tenure of the facility. If the facility is short-term, it can impose a lot of burden in terms of debt service. But this facility is long-term. We are talking about a facility of close to 40 years. The facility has an interest rate of 1%. It has a moratorium of about 10 years. So from the point of view of the cost and from the point of view of the tenure, because the longer the tenure, the lower is what we call the refinancing risk of a particular debt. So from these two perspectives, I don't think it's a bad idea to take that kind of facility. Then we look at whether it is foreign, whether it is domestic. Foreign debt has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. The advantage is that if it is coming in terms of liquid cash, it can help to shore up the currency supply, support the supply side of the economy. Because once those monies come in, the spending will be in naira, the money will come in dollars. So it has a way of supporting the supply side. But the flip side to that is that foreign currency debts also has the disadvantage of what we call the currency risk. That's the exchange rate risk. Because if the exchange rate continues to depreciate, the capacity to service it in the long run may become more difficult. So that is the implication of taking foreign facility. The third important point is to determine what exactly are we using the facility for. If you are using the facility to support the productive, to enhance the productivity of the economy, to enhance the capacity of the economy to grow, to be more productive, to be more competitive, then that will bring a lot of value to the economy. So these are some of the criteria or some of the factors we use in determining whether a facility is worth it or it's not worth it. But beyond that, we need to look at the totality of our debt sustainability. That's looking at the bigger picture. What is the size of the debt and how sustainable is this debt? But if you are looking at the micro issue of this particular facility you are talking about, it is not bad. Because within the framework of the debt management strategy of the debt management office, the focus and emphasis is actually on multilateral debts, which we call concessionary debts. And right now, if you look at the portfolio of our foreign debt, about 50% of it is concessionary facility, which is what is good, at least for an economy like ours. You know, about 15% or 14% is bilateral debt. Bilateral debt is the debt you take country to country, like the facility we are taking from China, for instance, that we are using to build infrastructure, build railways, build airports, and so on. The multilateral debts are debts that come from the World Bank, from African Development Bank, and so on. So those two components of debts are usually very concessionary. And when I say concessionary, it means that their costs, the interest rate they charge is extremely very low. I just cited the example of the last one we got from the World Bank, is 1%. And the tenor is long term. And for the bilateral debts, most of the bilateral debts that you have are actually devoted specifically to projects, just as the one we have from the China Exim Bank. The one that one should worry about is what we call the commercial debt. That is the Eurobond, because that is much more difficult to service. The interest rates are often very high. But from the point of view of the framework of the debt management, we are beginning to reduce the commercial debt component of our foreign debt. But generally, we need to also still worry about issues of debt sustainability, because our total debt now is about 121 trillion, which is huge. And so we need to worry about it.
All right, then we're just going to pause very quickly.
Sorry, sir, we're just going to pause very quickly. We have breaking news. We are just getting a report that the headquarters of Christ Embassy Church at Oregon here in Lagos is on fire. The cause of the inferno is not yet known, but be sure that once we get more details of the incident, we shall bring them right straight to you. We are getting reports now that headquarters of Christ Embassy Church in Oregon here in Lagos is on fire. The cause of the inferno is not yet known, but we are sure that once we get more details of the incident, we shall bring them straight to you on the show.
All right, then we were just had to quickly take that breaking news, sir. But let's move on very quickly in this conversation. The Mo Ibrahim Foundation report, of course, highlighted that Nigeria has received the most official development assistance from multilaterals in 2022. And when we think about Nigeria in terms of prioritizing what sectors or projects that should have these funds, these multilateral funds allocated, how can we focus on addressing the fundamental economic issues such as infrastructure deficits, unemployment, and poverty? And I also want to ask, what role you think the private sector can play in partnership with the government to maximize the impact of these huge amounts of funds that are coming into the country?
Well, the value that a debt or a facility that you are taking, whether it is domestic debt or foreign debt, the value it can bring into an economy depends on how it is spent. And the best way to get value from that kind of facility is to use it to support the capacity of the economy to grow and to expand. And one way to do that is to focus on infrastructure spending. That's spending, focusing making sure that those facilities are used essentially for infrastructure. Because one of the biggest challenges we have in the economy today that is retarding growth, apart from macroeconomic challenges, are structural issues. And the structural challenges are essentially around the issues of infrastructure deficit. So if you have facilities to support something like electricity provision, for instance, that will have a very good positive impact on the economy. We have a facility to support the development of our rail network. That will have a very good positive impact. If you have a facility to develop our roads, our health sector, these are things that can help the development of an economy. So if we are talking about how we can make good use of this facility and make the right choices in terms of the debts, because again, it's not always the best to allow the creditors to determine and to dictate what you use the facility for. I think it is for us to determine our priorities and say these are the areas in which we need support. So if you can get that support, that is fine. So I think it is for us to determine our priorities, things that will help to scale up to achieve our development objectives, particularly to develop our infrastructure. That's the way I think is the best way to go, and in a way that doesn't impose too much stress on us in terms of servicing the debt. As to what the private sector can do, well, we have a public-private partnership framework, which the government also has. The government has a strategy around that. If you look at the National Development Plan, about 80% or 85% of the financing of that plan is supposed to come from the private sector, because the government recognizes the critical role of the private sector in the development of the economy, in the development of infrastructure. So it is a question of determining projects that are good candidates for private investment. Because if the returns on investment is not good, the private sector is not likely to go there. So we need to identify those projects. We call them bankable projects, projects that are bankable, that the private sector can invest in. And we invite the private sector to come on board. We have seen what the private sector has been doing in aviation, for instance. The government doesn't have any presence in the aviation sector, apart from the regulatory presence. The government doesn't have any serious presence in our telecoms, again, apart from regulatory framework. So these are critical sectors, and there are other areas in which the private sector can play a big role. In our maritime sector, for instance, look at what has happened at the Lekki, deep sea port. It's essentially a private sector initiative. We can do a lot more in developing our port infrastructure, in developing our gas infrastructure, and also getting private sector to invest in some of our road infrastructure, in our railway system. But the framework to attract private investment has to be right. We need to reduce the risk, because the risk of private sector investment in infrastructure particularly is extremely very high. So we need to come with a framework that will de-risk investment of the private sector in infrastructure. That's what we call partial risk guarantee. The government has to provide some guarantee to give some comfort to the private sector in developing some of these infrastructures. So those are the kind of strategies that the government can put in place to pull in private sector capital into the development of this infra. Because when the private sector is investing, especially in the infrastructure space, we are talking about long-term investment. It's not like investing in treasury bills that you can cash out within 90 days or 1 year or something like that. No. This is long-term. It's a marathon. So the risk is higher. So the only way to attract the private sector into that kind of space is to be able to reduce the risk of their involvement. That's why I was talking about partial risk guarantees. Because there is policy risk, anything can happen, policies can change, that can make nonsense of the whole investment. There is political risk. Any government can come and begin to tinker with the contracts and things like that. So these are things that needs to be done to be able to attract private sector investment in infrastructure.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, thank you so much. But let me quickly slot in 2 questions before we let you go. I like the fact that you have mentioned the aspect of infrastructure, which was the cornerstone of the Buhari administration, which of course got this facility in 2022. But if you look at where we are as at today, the sustainability of our debt profile from 87 trillion as at early last year to about 121 trillion now. I would like your thoughts on the sustainability question, if you think that this is the right direction, and who is monitoring what we are getting these facilities for. And the second point, Dr. Yusuf, are you there? Okay. The second...
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. The second point will be that one of the key findings in the Mo Ibrahim report is that while we got among the African countries, while Nigeria got the largest facility, by 2024, we, out of the 5 top economies in Africa, Nigeria recorded the lowest in terms of revenue, far behind Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, and interestingly, Morocco. What are your thoughts on this? We're far bigger in terms of population than all these other countries, but our budget is smaller, and our revenue base, from what the report from Mo Ibrahim is saying, is also lagging behind. What, therefore, are we using this money for? And is there a correlation to what we are getting back from them? Very quickly, sir.
Well, about the issue of debt sustainability, we have metrics or parameters to determine debt sustainability. The first is what we call the debt to GDP ratio. The threshold that we have set for ourselves is 40%. That's debt to GDP ratio of 40%. Unfortunately, because of the fiscal challenges that we have had over the last few years, we seem to have been exceeding that threshold, which is why we need to worry again about debts and also about revenue and about growing the economy. Because up until last year or so, before the securitization of the waste and means financing, our debt to GDP ratio was around about 30% or even less. But once we securitized the waste and means financing, which was close to 30 trillion, our debt profile grew, skyrocketed to about over 90 trillion. As we are speaking now, you said it rightly, it's about 121 trillion. So, on the basis of the debt to GDP ratio, we are not in a comfortable position. Then on the basis of debt service to revenue ratio, which is also related to the second question that you have asked. Before now, at least up until last year, we were doing almost 80%, close to 90% at some point of our debt service to revenue ratio. There was a time where practically all the entire revenue was even consumed by the debt service. But with the coming in of this administration and with the reforms that took place, the revenue position improved, and that improved that parameter or that metric of that debt service to revenue ratio. But again, I'm not sure we are there yet, because the threshold that we have set, I think it's about 30% or so, but right now we are doing something in excess of that. At the initial period of the administration, for 6 months or so, the situation was much better. But now, with the fact that we are beginning to lose some revenue to this fuel subsidy problem and so on, which is a very complicated issue to deal with, the revenue situation is beginning to drop, because the amount that is also going to this subsidy thing is beginning to increase. because the fuel price has been static and the cost has been going up, then the relative price in the sub-region has also been increasing. So the outflow of fuel to these other countries has been increasing significantly in terms of smuggling. And you know our borders are very porous, and the CFA relating to the Naira, the CFA has become very strong. So a lot of outflows, petroleum products, our agricultural products, a lot of things are going out of the country because of the relative strength of the CFA. So these are issues that we need to deal with. So in dealing with the issue of debt sustainability, we need to scale up revenue. And that comes to your second point. Revenue in terms of improving the tax administration, which I think the current administration is trying to deal with. Then revenue in terms of the subsidy regime. The subsidy regime is a very difficult thing to manage politically. Because we did the subsidy removal, we know the social implications. We know the pushback from the citizens. Right now it's a dilemma. Because the subsidy situation is going up now, but it's a quandary. How do you now go back now and say that you want to increase fuel price?
Yeah.
So that is also affecting government revenue. Then again, in terms of improving the efficiency of tax administration, which the administration is working on to improve the tax administration, and more importantly, is to deal with leakages in some key revenue sources, which are non-tax, so for instance, like the oil and gas sector. If we're able to improve our oil outputs, we have been grappling with 1.5, 1.6. We have not been able to even approach 2 million barrels per day. If we're able to make progress with that, of course, the revenue situation will improve.
All right.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that, and again, some of our MDAs that are also revenue generating. We need to optimize revenue generation from those other sources. So those are the things I think we can do, to improve the revenue, improving the tax administration, using more technology to drive tax, which the administration has said they are already doing.
Yes.
Then dealing in particular with our situation with our oil and gas sector.
Yes, Dr. Muda.
Because no matter what we say, even though we say that we are diversifying the economy, the oil and gas sector is still very key, both to revenue and to foreign exchange earnings.
Unfortunately.
So we need to get it right.
We have run out of time, but you have, of course, made very, very resilient points this morning. We appreciate your time and analysis on the morning show. Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you for being here.